Hi, everyone. I'm Mansoor Javidan, and I'm the professor in this course. And this is the second live session. Unfortunately, our first live session, we had issues and it did not work. But it looks like we're in good shape for this session. I have with me my two colleagues, Laura Polk and Jennifer Smith, who are online, and they may get into the conversations if there are things that we would like to discuss. The purpose of the live sessions is really for me to respond to any questions or concerns that you might have, and clarify anything that needs to be clarified. I have with me, I have a set of questions that students have posed on the discussion board, and I'm going to read the questions and answer them. And before that, I'd like to thank you all for taking the time to go through the course and also to write questions for us. It's important for us to have an opportunity to respond to your questions and concerns and help you. All right, I'm going to get started with the first question. When we talk about culturally specific attributes of leadership and management, don't we run the risk of reinforcing cultural stereotypes? For example, Asians work collectively when Anglo-Saxon cultures are individualistic, etc. Haven't we learned that culture is too fluid and dynamic to be captured in these kinds of stereotypes? This is a really important point that I need to clarify and explain. This course we're taking is a course called Cross-Cultural Communication. Now, the ultimate objective of this course is to be able to influence, to be able to work effectively, to be able to communicate effectively with people who are coming from different cultures than yourself. Doesn't matter what culture you are from. When you're trying to communicate with people from other parts of the world, what can you do? What tools are available to you? And what are the things that you can do to improve the probability of effective communication? Now, for you to be able to communicate effectively with someone from another culture, one of the first things you need to do is to understand what is the message that that individual is sending, what is the way that that individual is behaving, and why is that individual behaving the way he or she is. So you need to try to understand their thinking way and thinking process, and you need to understand the behavior, their behavior, and the reason for their behavior. Now, let's take the case of a hypothetical person whose name, let's say we choose Francis. So Francis happens to be from France. And I, as an American manager, I'm trying to communicate effectively with Francis from France. As I mentioned earlier, what I need to do is I need to have a better understanding of how Francis thinks and how Francis behaves and why Francis behaves the way she does. Now, think about this. What are some of the drivers of the way that we think and the way that we behave? Personality. our personality is one reason why we behave and why we think the way we do. For example, some individuals have a personality that's very open to new adventures and new situations. Some individuals are not interested. Their personality is such that they prefer stability and predictability. So one driver of Frances's behavior is her personality. Another driver of Frances's behavior is her background. Is she an educated person? Does she have a master's degree, an undergraduate degree, or PhD? Does she have high school education or not? Now, why is education important? It's because as we go through years of education, our brain learns to think differently. So another reason why Frances thinks and behaves the way she does is her education and level of education. Another driver of Frances's behavior and thinking may be her gender. The way that a woman thinks and behaves may be different than the way that a man behaves and thinks. Another possible driver of Frances's thinking and behavior is work experience. Is Frances a very experienced individual with years of experience, or is she someone with very little work experience? The answer to that helps us better understand how and why she thinks and behaves. Another possible driver of Frances's thinking and behavior is age. How old is Frances? Is she 15 years old or is she 60 years old? The way that a 60-year-old person thinks and acts is different from the way that a 15-year-old teenager thinks and acts. Another possible driver of Frances's behavior is her cultural background. What part of the world did she grow up? What country? What culture? So what I just went through is an example of several reasons, drivers of how we think and behave. They're all important. Not a single one is more important than others. They're all important. Now, if this were a course in psychology, the focus would be on personality. How personality of individuals impacts the way they think and behave. This is a course in cross-cultural communication. So the focus of this course is how cultural background of an individual impacts the way that that individual behaves and acts. It doesn't mean that cultural background is the only driver of a person's behavior. It just means that it's one driver that is the focus of this course. Now, when you take other courses, if you take a course in gender differences, you will learn all the ways that gender identity impacts the way people behave and think. This is a course in cross-cultural communication. So our focus is understanding how cultural background impacts the way someone thinks and behaves. It's only one of the drivers, but it's the focus of this course. That's why we are emphasizing all these things that we do about culture of the country. Which brings me to the difference between cultural stereotyping and cultural understanding. Cultural stereotyping, like any kind of stereotyping, is to assume that one variable is the only predictor of our behavior or our thinking. Gender stereotyping means that if you're a man, this is who you are and this is how you do things. If you're a woman, this is who you are and how you do things. I don't care about you as a person. I brush everybody the same way based on gender. Cultural stereotyping, idea. So if I know from what culture you are from, you are Francis, you're from France, you're French, I stereotype by saying only your cultural background drives your behaviors because all the French are the same. Well, we know that's not true. So our purpose in this course is not to teach stereotypes. Our purpose in this course is to give you tools, one of the tools that can help you better understand somebody else's behavior. So let's go back to the example of this question. Asian managers working collectively. All studies of cultures of Asia versus Anglo-Saxon cultures point to the conclusion that in general, Asian cultures tend to be group-oriented. Okay, so now let's say I am an American and I have that piece of information. And I'm now working with an Indonesian manager. If I'm using stereotypes, my reaction is, oh, this person is Indonesian, so they're all the same, which we know is wrong. So now, knowing that Indonesian culture, like other Asian cultures, tend to be more group-oriented, I start asking this Indonesian managers questions about how does he or she work with his or her Indonesian team? How does he or she work with his or her Indonesian colleagues? So instead of making assumptions that just because you're Indonesian, I assume you are collectively oriented, instead of doing that, I ask questions. Instead of making assumptions, I ask questions. So the reason we're giving you all of this information in this course is to give you the ability to ask questions, to learn about the individual you're dealing with. So that's the purpose of this course, not to stereotype, but to give you information and tools to help you better communicate with people from other parts of the world. Okay, good. Now let's go to, there's another question, or maybe a continuation of the first question. Stereotyping is limiting, dangerous, and myopic. Totally agree with that. You know why we have stereotypes as human beings? We use stereotypes because stereotypes make our lives easy. Instead of me trying to understand every individual Indonesian, I use one stereotype. They're all collective. That makes life easy for me. It's wrong. It gets me into the wrong direction. But it makes my brain, it helps my brain go slow and not think. So I totally agree with that statement. But it can be used as a springboard to understand some very broad brush strokes of differences in culture. So as long as you use the information in this course as a springboard for learning, as a set of tools to help you ask the right questions rather than making assumptions. As long as you keep that purpose in mind, you will find the tools in the course very helpful to you. All right. I'm going to go to another question. Professor Javidan, as I see and read all reading material, I get the understanding that some of personalities have advantages on global mindset as they are born nature. However, is it really have correlation between personality types with global mindset items? I also would like to ask some challenge related with globe dimensions. In short, what the difference between Hofstede dimensions and globe? Okay, so two separate questions. First question is there a relationship between personality and dimensions of global mindset? And the answer is yes. Why? Because if you recall, global mindset has three dimensions: intellectual capital, psychological capital, and social capital. The psychological capital part of global mindset is rooted and connected to one's personality. Individuals who are more outgoing will find it easier on the psychological capital side. Individuals who are more open to new adventures, new ideas, will be stronger on psychological capital. So I totally agree with the question that yes, there is a connection between some aspects of personality and some aspects of global mindset, specifically on psychological capital side. Now, the second question is, are there differences, and what are they, between Hofstede's work and the globe work? Hofstede was the pioneer in the field. In the 1970s, he collected some information for the first time and was able to identify dimensions of culture. And that work has been very powerful, very influential, and has helped give direction to research on this topic. When we started the GLOBE project in the early 1990s, we started by working and reading and using Hofstede's dimensions because they're very helpful and pioneering. So we ended up with 4 dimensions that were similar to Hofstede's, although we developed new items and scales to measure them. Power distance is an example. Hofstede pioneered the notion of power distance. We used his vocabulary and we developed a set of new items to measure the same thing. In some cases, there is positive correlation between Hofstede and globe dimensions, and in some cases there is a negative correlation. But there is overlap in terms of gender egalitarianism, power distance, and what Hofstede calls when he uses the dimension of masculinity, a globe's version is 2 dimensions. One is gender egalitarianism, and the other one is assertiveness. So what we tried to do was to add to the literature and to the ideas and the information that Hofstede had provided, provide more information on it, dig deeper, and add new dimensions to it. So that's the connection between the 2 research projects and the 2 sets of findings. All right. Let me see if I have any more questions. Oh, there is a question about successful multinational companies like Honda that have strong technology And the question is, do they pay attention to cultural differences? Should they pay attention to cultural differences? I responded to this question on the discussion board, but I want to add a little more to my response. So it is true that companies, many companies like Honda or many other multinational companies have very strong, high quality technology or other capabilities that they want to move outside of their own borders into new countries. Those companies that take a more sophisticated approach, that try to learn the cultural underpinnings of how people do things differently in different parts of the world, tend to be more successful in implementing, in transferring their technology in other countries. Those companies that have very good technology or capability, but don't pay attention to the cultural underpinning of how things are done, usually tend to face obstacles, issues, additional time, additional money, additional headache. So it's not technology in contrast to cultural understanding. It's technology and cultural understanding. That's a very good package. It's a much better package than technology and no cultural understanding. So between these two options, the one that includes cultural understanding simply makes things easier for the company to achieve its objectives. All right. I think I've covered the questions here. Laura, you have questions for us?
Yes, we have two questions, looks like from the classroom. The first one is, Dr. Javidan, there was an interesting discussion about the cultural differences between self-assurance versus arrogance. What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I really like that question because this is an issue that I deal with on a regular basis with executives. When it comes to global leadership and managing people from other parts of the world, there is a big difference between self-assurance and arrogance. Someone who is arrogant, his or her view is, I have the answers. I know what's good for you. I don't really know what's going on in your part of the world, but I know I have the answers. So arrogance means being closed-minded, not asking questions, but giving answers. So an arrogant person, the way that he or she thinks is, I know I'm going to be successful because I know the answers. Now, let's contrast that with self-assurance. A self-assured person is someone who says, I know I'm going to be successful. You know why? Because I know what I do not know. I know what questions to ask. I know where to find the answers. So a self-assured person, the way that he or she thinks is, I know I'm going to be successful because I know what questions to ask. So that is the key difference. A self-assured global leader is someone who is confident that they will succeed, but they will succeed because they will rely on other people, because they have an interest in learning about other people. They are open-minded about the way that things are done in different parts of the world. So they collect information, they absorb knowledge, they develop an understanding of the context that they're dealing with, and then they help come up with the solutions and the answers. So, two very different approaches. I know I'm going to be successful because I know all the answers, versus I know I'm going to be successful because I know what questions to ask. That is the difference. All right.
Okay. And then we also received some questions around the information between the globe model and the PowerPoint regarding power distance. Would you be able to explain more in depth on both of those, please?
Okay, now let's see. Let's start with power distance. Is the question asking me to provide an explanation about power distance?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So let's start with that. By the way, I think I've mentioned this in my videos, and I'm going to repeat it. Power distance is the most important cultural dimension when it comes to leadership, management, and organizational issues. Now, what does it mean in real terms? What is life like in a hierarchical society? A society that is high power distance is a society where everything is hierarchical. The gap between the people who have the power and the people who don't have the power is big. So the distance between the people is big. So in a high power distance society, political leaders have a lot of status. People are careful about criticizing them. In a high power distance society or in a high hierarchical society, the supervisor makes all the decisions. The employees, the direct reports, simply implement every instruction that the supervisor gives them. There's not much discussion, debate, challenge, questioning. It's just, I give you instructions and you follow them. In a high power distance society or in a hierarchical society, parents tell kids what's good for them. And kids' job is to completely follow instructions of their parents. So as you can see, a hierarchical society is one where somebody gives instructions and orders and another person follows them. So one group or one individual has power over another group or individual. Now, in a low power distance society, that gap is smaller. So if you're my boss, instead of you giving me instructions every time, you ask me, well, what do you think? What do you think we should do with this issue? Do you have any ideas? What do you think would be a right way of dealing with this problem? So the boss starts a conversation, collects input, gets a group of people together, have discussions and debates. In a low power distance society, you have 5 people in a room, every one of them will openly contribute, express their views, comments, whether they disagree or agree, doesn't matter. Everybody wants to contribute. Everybody wants to express their views. Why? Because they've learned, as they've grown up in their society, they've learned that that's how you do things. Doesn't matter what it is you're doing, you get other people involved and you express your views. So in low power distance societies, politicians are not a big deal. People can criticize them, challenge them, get rid of them through democratic means. So those relationships are much less formal and two-way. Everything is two-way. In hierarchical society, everything is one-way, from top to the bottom. So that's the big difference.
We did receive another question.
All right.
It says, there have been great discussions about having a cultural lens. However, can you effectively communicate with someone without a cultural lens, or does this create a hardship?
Well, everybody has a cultural lens. And the cultural lens is how we see the world, how we interpret the world. And it's all based on our life experiences. As you've seen in my video, depending on what part of the world I grow up, how I experience life, I develop a particular cultural lens. And it's important for every human being to have a cultural lens, because if you don't have it, you're going to be very confused and very anxious. So by the time somebody is 15, 16 years old, we all have a cultural lens that helps us function in our own community, in our own society. Now, the problem starts when people have very different cultural lenses. So I'm going to give you an extreme example. Take the example of one person from a culture, or one group from a culture that is highly gender egalitarian. So in their minds, men and women are the same, and if all opportunities should be equal for men and women. The fact that one is male and one is female is not relevant. That's an example of a gender egalitarian society. So let's have a group from that kind of a cultural lens working or negotiating or communicating with a group from another culture where, as they grew up, they learned that women have specific responsibilities and roles, for mostly being a mother, taking care of the family, being a good mother to children, being a good wife to her husband. So very different and prescribed roles for men and women in their culture. So now these two groups want to discuss something. To begin with, in the first group, there may be a number of women. In the second group, very unlikely to have women in a group like that. So the fact that there is a number of women in the first group may make some of the men in the second group uncomfortable, just right off the bat. It's not about them as individuals, it's about, in this cultural lens of the second group, they have had no experience of interacting with women in a work environment. So they become uncomfortable, they don't know what to do, they don't know what to say. It's just a new experience to them. And the same way, many members of the first group, particularly the women in the first group, may get irritated, annoyed, frustrated because of the comments that are made by the second group about women, or the way that the women in the first group are being treated or communicated with. So these two lenses come into contact, and they're so different that right off the bat, they cause conflict, they cause misunderstanding, they cause miscommunication. So that's how cultural misunderstanding and miscommunication shows up.
We have another question.
Oh, we have a good group.
We do have a good group.
Wonderful.
The global mindset tool determines the way we view things, but after knowledge and experience, this will change. How can we improve our scores in a category such as global business savvy?
Aha. Well, I'm going to give you a very specific example. So at Thunderbird, where the business school that I'm at, the graduate school, as well as 40 other business schools, mostly in the US and other countries, we do global mindset inventory with all incoming students. So 2 weeks before they start their MBA program, they're invited to complete the GMI, or the Global Mindset Inventory. And we show them their profile and all of that. And then 6 weeks prior to graduation, we invite them to again complete the GMI survey. And we show them their profile, the pre and the post. The biggest improvement of the 9 elements of global mindset, the biggest improvement in any MBA program is on global business savvy, which makes sense. That's why they're in a business school. They want to learn about global business. So obviously, if you want to improve your global business savvy, taking an educational program in business would be the obvious choice. Now, if you don't want to do that or don't have the opportunity to do that, there are many other things that you can do on your own. Websites. There are so many fantastic websites you can go to learn about industries, to learn about how companies do business in different parts of the world. Publications, books, articles. And there are publications in different parts of the world. For example, Wall Street Journal, which is a very prominent American business newspaper, gives daily report on what's going on in this country, is also published in Europe, in Asia, and provides reports on business activities in those parts of the world. So, great opportunity to visit their websites and learn about what's going on in a particular region of the world or country of the world that you're interested in about business. In addition to that, I'm going to recommend specifically a newspaper called the Financial Times. The Financial Times, which is a British publication, is a daily newspaper, but it's all about global business. Page after page, they give you updates and really interesting, thoughtful news stories about how companies are doing business, how governments are getting involved in business, etc., etc. So the Financial Times is a magnificent source. The same publisher also publishes the world-famous The Economist magazine, which is also, it's a weekly publication, and it's also a wonderful source of learning about global business in many different parts of the world. So those two are the easiest that I know of. Now, I'm going to make one other recommendation, which I always find helpful. If you own an iPhone 6 or above, there is an app that comes automatically with the iPhone. It's called News. The beauty of this app is you choose the topics you're interested in. So you can choose IBM. I want to know what's going on with IBM. Or Lufthansa. Or pharmaceutical industry. You choose the topics that you want to be updated on. And this app is a news aggregator and gives you updates on an hourly basis on what's going on in those areas that you've selected. If you don't have iPhone, there is a separate app. It's called News 360. Does exactly the same thing. So those are very simple ways, no cost, of keeping yourself up to date and learning about how business is done in different parts of the world. All right.
So we do have two more questions.
Okay.
We'll go to this one first from Michaela. She says, as noted in the reading on the Global Mindset Project, improving intellectual and social capital can be learned, but developing psychological capital is hard. What steps can be taken to develop that?
You're quite right. The psychological capital part of global mindset is the hardest part to develop. Now, let's dig a little deeper. What's inside psychological capital? Quest for adventure, self-assurance, passion for diversity. Those are the three pieces. Passion for diversity, quest for adventure, and self-assurance. There are different things you can do to improve your profile in terms of self-assurance versus passion for diversity versus self-assurance, passion for diversity, and quest for adventure. Now, I'm going to give you some examples. So, On self-assurance, there are actually online courses, webinars, TED Talks on self-assurance, how you build your self-confidence. So I would recommend you watch some of those. No cost to you. Well, there are actually some courses that you have to pay for, but there are also free options. Another suggestion I have is, do you know anyone in your family? Do you know anyone in your work environment who you consider a very self-confident person? Use that person as your role model. Learn from that person. What are the things that that person does? Starting from such simple things as the way that person behaves, the way that person sits, the way that person speaks, all of those are related to one's self-confidence and self-assurance. So those are simple ideas on that. On passion for diversity, one simple thing you may want to do is make a plan for yourself to go to different ethnic restaurants in your city. Once a week. Try a different food. If you happen to live in a big city, there is an organization called Internations. Internations is a group of people, locals and expats who happen to live in that city. And it's the website is internations.org. Get on that website. They have chapters in many major cities all over the world. It's a social organization. It's people from different parts of the world who get together, have a drink, have a meal, go hiking, do fun stuff together. And what brings them together is their passion for diversity. So get yourself in the middle of them. Participate with them. Get to know them in individual members. And by building these relationships with people from different parts of the world and having positive social experiences with these people, it'll make it easier for you to develop a greater level of passion for people from other parts of the world and also understand it. Quest for adventure. Again, these are tough things. These are really harder parts of global mindset to change. But again, in your family, in the work environment, do you know anyone who you consider someone who is open to adventure, someone who tries new things, someone who enjoys new ideas? Use them as your role model. Talk to them. Learn from them. At the same time, there's also websites and TED Talks on that subject that I would recommend you you go to, you spend some time, and you watch and practice a few things. But the 3 elements of psychological capital are harder to develop in the sense that they take more time, take more effort. And it really helps if you have a mentor or a friend who can support you in your journey of improvement. It really helps. Or a parent or a sibling, someone who you can talk to, someone who can be a sounding board, someone who can give you ideas and suggestions or listen to your concerns and questions. So those are some examples. Good luck with it.
Okay, I think this is the last question. In week 3, the activity focuses on how rude was that? How can you tactfully improve a relationship when you have accidentally offended someone?
Believe me, that happens many times. People get offended in cross-cultural situations, not because somebody intends to offend them, but because somebody does something without realizing the unintended consequence of that action or that message for the other person. So question is, what do you do? I have a very simple answer. be humble and be human, and tell that other person, you know what? I've now learned, I'm taking a course with this professor in the US teaching me about cross-cultural communication. And now one of the things I've learned is someone like me can do things and can say things that may be interpreted differently by someone from another part of the world, and may be insulting or offending to another person without me even realizing it. So now that I know that, and I have a sense that I may have done that, I apologize, but let's have a conversation. Let's turn that event into a learning situation for both of us. So be humble about it. We have some humor, a sense of humor in it, and just be human about it. Don't overthink it. Just use the learning you have achieved in this course by saying to another person, hey, I may have messed up. Now I know. And I want to make sure I don't do it again. So help me out. So that way, in my experience, it brings down the emotions, it cools the other person. It really shows that you care and you want to not only improve the particular situation, but you also want to be a better person in such situations in general. And everybody I know would respect that. So that'd be my suggestion. By the way, I've done it myself many times. You know, I'm speaking from experience.
I have a follow-up question.
All right.
Time for it. Follow-up question on the organizational leadership psychological capital question from earlier.
Mm-hmm.
How can organizations' leadership promote growth in psychological capital in the culture of an organization?
Very good. That's a very thoughtful question. And it sounds like the person who's asking that question works for a reasonably large organization, because these issues become really relevant in bigger companies. Companies can do a lot. And I'm going to give you some examples of that. First of all, the message that this is important, that improving psychological capital, improving passion for diversity is important for this company. That message needs to be communicated. So through words and actions, the top management of the organization, the people in positions of authority can start communicating that, yeah, you know, for us as an organization to be successful, all of us have to be better at this. We have to pay attention to how we can learn our abilities. By the way, I'm going to detour a little bit, but you'll know why. I was in Washington, D.C. Tuesday at a conference with a group of executives. And a very similar question came up. Someone asked me a very similar question, except the words he used was, what can the company do to improve people's soft skills? And I said, I find it funny we use the word soft because these are actually very hard skills to develop. So the fact, it's also important for the company and its managers to understand that it's hard to develop these things. It doesn't happen just because somebody says it should happen. Now, the reason I'm making this point is once the company understands it's not easy, then the company can provide training, education, mentoring, coaching. HR group can play a very big role in supporting the people who are really keen on improving their psychological capital. So what can the company do? First, it should emphasize its importance. Second, it should understand the complexity of it. Third, it should provide resources and support mechanisms that can be very helpful to their managers and employees. That's it. All right. I guess we've covered all the questions, and good timing too. Well, thank you very much for all your questions, and keep them coming. If you have questions or concerns, post them on the discussion board, and we're all happy. Jennifer, Laura, myself, our team is more than happy to try to address all your questions and concerns. I hope you've been enjoying the first 3 weeks of the course, and best wishes with the rest of it. Thank you.